So hang on. Who is that 541514 number? So we can call you by name instead of by number.
Hi, this is the mystery phone number ending in 2679. This is Sarah Fouché, member. I will be able to turn my camera on in about 15 minutes or so. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Just wanted to know who that was. Welcome, Sarah. Really glad you're
Thank
here.
you.
Welcome, Lori, who's joined us. And we're still gathering. Welcome, Doris.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Judy.
Okay, we're still waiting just for a couple more committee members, but I'm going to go ahead and let in members of the public, and then Bruce, you can feel free to just to get us started.
Okay, well, why don't you let members of the public in? We'll just wait another moment or two for other committee members to join.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, we're a minute or two after 1, and we've got a great agenda for today. So let's get started. We're going to just start with a tech check. Everybody, you want to walk us through that tech check?
Yes, I would love to.
Jenny or Katie?
Yep, I can do that. So just kind of a reminder, I know this is our second meeting, so you're all pretty familiar now, but just a reminder with how to use the Zoom function. We do ask if you are able and you're a committee member to please stay on camera. If you're not, that's absolutely okay. But then that just signifies to the public that is attending or viewing who committee members are. So keep your camera connected if possible. Stay muted unless you are ready to speak, and at which point you will select the raise hand function. And then, yeah, just a reminder that members of the public are here and able to join, or able to view. They just can't participate unless it's through public comment. But other than that, that's good for the tech check. So I'm just going to go right into the roll call. So when I say your name, just please let us know if you're here. And we'll start with Anne Lovejoy.
Hi.
Thank you, Anne. Bruce Goldberg.
Present.
Doris Karagu.
Here.
Thank you. Looks like Doug Lowe. He just joined. Give him a second to get connected. Judy Richardson.
Present.
Laura Byerly. Lori Hoagland.
Here.
Michael Horry. Paula Weldon.
Present.
Paul Stanfill.
I am here.
Rosalind Lindsay. And then Sarah Boucher, which I just need to give her permission to connect. And she is here with us, so hello, Sarah. And then I just want to circle back to Douglas Flo. Able to connect your audio, Doug? Okay, not yet, but hopefully.
We'll come back to Doug, hopefully in a moment or two.
Perfect. Okay, so we're just missing 2 members, but hopefully they will join shortly, and I'll let them in as we proceed. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Bruce.
Great, thanks. So welcome everybody. We've got a great agenda. Basically, I think as everybody knows, this is our first meeting where we're going to start to delve into some of the operational issues of Universal Health Plan Board. And, you know, today we're going to discuss public corporations, but I think what you'll see is we've really set this up as this is sort of the cadence that we will have going forward, where we'll have some draft information that's given to people, some background reading, as well as some draft proposals. We'll come and meet as a group. We'll discuss that draft proposal. We'll make some edits to it as need be based on what committee members think. And then we will send that back on to the entire board. I think there'll be some items that we will probably have less discussion about that are pretty more straightforward, and some where we will have more that may take 1 or 2 meetings to draft and redraft a position paper. So, you know, today, as I indicated, will be about Oregon public corporations. Jenny's going to give us some background. We then have a really great panel of several individuals who currently are part of or have developed public corporations in the past. Then we'll take a break. We'll have a discussion about the proposal that has been drafted, and then we'll move forward. So, you know, with that, let me just see if there are any questions. Okay, so I am going to turn things over to Jenny, who is going to give us a sort of a background and review of public corporations.
Thank you, Bruce. Just want to do a tech check. You can hear me okay? Great. Okay, so Katie, you can go to the first slide. Hi, everyone. I am Jenny Donovan. I'm one of your committee staff members. So I've done some background research on public corporations in Oregon to identify what public corporations Oregon currently has, how those corporations are set up, and how Oregon in through the legislature sort of looks at creating a public corporation, so we can go through and understand a little bit more. And I've included some information specific to the organizations that the panelists will be representing here today, so that we can have a little more background as we enter that discussion with them. So in my research, I identified 4 organizations in Oregon that are set up as public corporations. The first was SAFE Corporation, which was set up in 1979. It was established, I believe, by statute in 1979 and then organized as a public corporation in 1980. Oregon Health and Science University, OHSU, which became a public corporation in 1995. Hopefully all of you had an opportunity to look at the background reading. There was a really great piece that sort of talked about what that conversion looked like for OHSU and some of the benefits. The State Fair Council, which was established in 2013, and the Willamette Falls Locks Authority, which was established in 2021. So we're going to have representatives from SAFE, from OHSU, and from the Willamette Falls Locks Authority here with us today. Next slide. So first, defining a public corporation. So when OHSU was established was the first time, from what I can find in state statute, that the state actually defined what a public corporation was. Now, it's important to understand that this definition is only in the statutes for OHSU, and so only applies to OHSU, but it does give a little bit of an idea of what the state was looking at when they're creating a public corporation. Some of the main themes here are looking at it sets forth the purpose for an entity to be established as a public corporation to carry out public missions and services with increased operating flexibility, while still retaining those principles of public accountability and fundamental public policy. So giving the organization a little bit of freedom and flexibility in how it operates, but still ingraining it in that transparency and in that public policy that the state upholds in all of its entities. And this definition includes a provision that the board of directors for a public corporation is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. But as I said, this definition only applies to OHSU, and we'll see when we get to the Willamette Locks Authority, which isn't necessarily a board, it's an authority of appointed members. They're only appointed by the governor. They aren't Senate confirmed. Next slide. So looking at statutory language, SAFE was established many, many years ago, 1979, the first one that was established. After that, OHSU wasn't established until 1995 as a public corporation, or really transitioned as a public corporation. But with OHSU, we see the beginnings of what the state started to craft as language around what a public corporation would be defined as. And again, there's no standalone definition for public corporation, but we do have the information that comes from this statutory language that's now common in OHSU statutes, in the Willamette Locks Authority, and in the State Fair Council. And so some things to look at here is that in the statutory language, it explicitly states that they shall carry out a public corporation shall carry out all powers, right, and privileges that are expressly conferred upon the public corporation, are applied by law or incident to such powers, rights, and privileges. So this language kind of shows how a public corporation is able to be structured specific to the needs of the entity being designated, in that it has rights that are expressly conferred upon it. But while it's still a public body, there are some other laws that apply to public bodies, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, that aren't so much expressly in the law that we may want to exempt ourselves from if we're looking at a public corporation. And so while this allows for public corporations to be structured to specific needs and the need to detail, it also presents a little bit of a challenge ensuring that the needs of the corporation are expressly included. And so really ensuring that as the public corporation is being crafted in that statutory language, that all of those provisions that need to be there are there. And that's something we can talk to the panelists about a little bit. Next slide. So when we talk about public corporation structures in general, this is kind of an overview of what we were just talking about. So in addition to the specifics, we can glean some general attributes looking at the OHSU definition and this common statutory language. So the public mission is statewide. And that public corporation is a government entity. So it is still designated as a government entity. But it's not subject to the agency statutes or constitutional provisions, which in my reading is more aligned to the executive branch, looking at state agencies and state government bodies within that executive branch. And then if the UHPGB were to adopt a public corporation as its administrative structure, it would really be necessary for the board to work closely with the drafters of that statutory language as the plan comes together, so that likely we would be looking at working with legislative counsel to identify all the statutory and constitutional provisions that may be applicable or we may want to exclude ourselves from, not constitutional, obviously, and determine which laws we would operate under, so that we would have assistance in reviewing the final plan to understand which laws we would explicitly want or maybe explicitly not want. So we'll discuss a few of these in the next slides, and I made some recommendations in the draft proposal that you all received. But this is going to be an area where we really want to dig in with the panelists and ask them some of the questions about their exclusions and their explicit adherence to statutes. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to look at SAFE first. It was established, like I said, I think the statute passed in '79, but was established in 1980. It has a board of directors, 5 individuals that are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And it's led by a chief operations officer who also serves as their president. So a regular sort of corporate structure, but they are a public body. And so examples of applicable state laws, those that apply to them, is that they are still subject to public records, public reports, and public meeting laws, which we've talked a lot about in the board and a little bit in this committee, and government cooperation and arbitration, which is a broad area of law that I think that, for me, I'd like to hear a little bit from the panelists about whether or not this benefits them. And this is things where you can make agreements with local municipalities or with other government entities for cooperation in all kinds of different agreements, contracting, employment. And so it's unclear to me at this point whether this would be something that the board would want to consider writing in, because I don't know exactly at this point, 1, what the board's full plan would be, or 2, how other entities that are public corporations have seen a benefit or maybe a detriment in being part of this law. And then examples of exemptions. So one of the big ones is obtaining goods and services through the Department of Administrative Services. So the Department of Administrative Services is part of the executive branch, and it's sort of the back office for all of the state agencies. It has the Chief Human Resources Office, Chief IT offices. And so being excluded from obtaining goods and services there, I think that depending on who you were talking to, a lot of people might say that that's a really great thing to be exempted from. It allows greater freedom of purchasing and reducing time frames for purchasing and government oversight of how things are purchased and acquired. So it also excludes them from state personnel relations. And that includes entity for state classification and compensation designations and state regulations administered by the Chief Human Resources Office. Then there's state financial administration. And this is an exemption from the governor's budget process and financial management principles and oversight from DAS. And while these are great principles, there's still the idea of how much freedom is this, the universal health plan going to need in terms of how it operates financially. So this is an area where we're going to really want to hear from the Finance and Revenue Committee as they do their work, so the board can consider what kind of statutory language needs to cover how that revenue process and the finances process is actually covered. So these are going to be outstanding questions. And then state administration of public funds. So this is accounting principles, how state funds are handled. And so we may want freedom there in terms of operating such a huge fund that a universal health plan would have to have. And it'll be essential, like I said, for finance and revenue to look at this, and then looking at how the UHPGB, if they adopt a public corporation, starts to structure that language. Public contracting is a really big one. The public contracting procurement oversight that the state has can be a cumbersome process, and it involves DOJ oversight as well. And I think that a lot of people sometimes get frustrated by procurement. It is there to ensure fairness and equity in public contracting, but can add a pretty significant amount of time to different projects because of the amount of time it takes for public contracting. Next slide. So OHSU, as I said, was established as a public corporation, really transitioned in 1995. It has an 11-member board of directors that includes the university president, and they are also appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate, except for the university president. So they're also under the public records, public reports, and meetings laws. And this really is one of those fundamental things about a public corporation and looking at transparency. And the board has adopted in its values and principles a commitment to transparency. And so seeing public corporations uniformly kind of under this law makes a lot of sense in looking at that public spirit that these corporations are founded under. Government ethics. So government ethics really goes hand in hand in a lot of ways with public records and meetings laws, in that it's ensuring that public officers, whether they're part of the executive agency branch or a public corporation, are operating in the good of the public and following ethics standards. And then depositories and public funds and securities. So this is another one of those areas of law that I'm unfamiliar with, and looking at the statutes, not sure how it would apply to a universal health plan. So this is something that it would be interesting to talk to the panelists about, those that it's applicable to, OHSU, and we'll see also the Willamette Locks, about whether or not this is something they're aware of, something that helps them in their operations, or that they've seen issues with, just to get a better understanding of how this would fit into the plan that we're looking at. And again, for examples of exemptions, personnel relations, financial administration, administration of public funds, public contracting, that procurement process, and audits of public funds and financial records. So for OHSU, they're exempted from this, but there is a lot of language in their statute about them themselves needing to do audits and sort of an audit schedule for that. Whereas for the state, the Secretary of State and the Treasury often do audits of state agencies. That's again something that the board would have to take up in looking at exactly what they would want to be applicable to them or exempted from. Next slide. And then the Willamette Locks Falls Authority. They're the most recent public corporation to be established in 2021. As I mentioned before, they do have an 11-member board appointed, well, they're an authority appointed by the governor, but they aren't confirmed by the Senate. And we might want to talk with their executive director about if that is something that they've taken into consideration, if it's a good thing or a bad thing or something that they don't really consider. The authority itself appoints their executive director, and he'll be with us today. So examples of applicable state laws, again, public records, government ethics, and as I noted, also the depositories and public funds and securities. So examples of exemptions, again, we're looking at personnel relations, state of financial administration, public funds, public contracting, and audits. These are things that seem continuously in that sort of list of exemptions to give that more flexible operating structure for a public corporation. Next slide. And so as I reviewed all of the statutes for the 4 public corporations, I started to see there's huge lists within some of the statutory language of multiple chapters of the Oregon Revised statutes that they're exempt from, and then some common individual statutes that they're exempt from. So I listed some of the common ones here, noting that all of these apply as exemptions to OHSU, to the Willamette Falls Locks Authority, and to the State Fair, but not all of them apply to SAFE. Like I said, it was established much earlier, and a lot of the statutory constructions that are more uniform now weren't that way when SAFE was established. But something interesting to note here is that state real property and state lands generally are both exclusions for all 3 of the other public corporations. And it's good to note that all 3 of them also have actual business that relates to use of public lands. So OHSU was gifted some of the lands and has authority over some of the lands where the hospital and the university were situated. And then the Willamette Falls Locks Authority actually has the locks. And then the state fair deals with the state fairgrounds. And so those are some exemptions in there that maybe wouldn't be as applicable, but could be to a board created public corporation. Next slide. And finally, statutory exemptions. So those were entire chapters of law that were excluded. And then there are some specific statute exemptions that are common among the 4 different public corporations. So Administrative Procedures Acts, most of them don't have the authority to write administrative rules. Attorney General review of agreements. Again, that's part of that contracting exemption and not having the Attorney General have to be the counsel of the entity. Same with the approval of agreements. Health benefits, workplace harassment, deferred compensation, those personnel issues aren't usually part of these public corporations. And then bargaining for representatives, the unions may be different if the universal health plan was unionized. And then in terms of workers' compensation, it's important to note that they're not excluded from this entire statute, but just Section 2 of the statute, which requires state entities to receive their worker compensation insurance from SAFE Corporation. It's the state's insurer. And so many of these public corporations are exempted from that. And so that's basically the overview of the public corporations. I'm happy to take any questions that you'd like for me to answer as we get ready for the panel to come on.
Yeah, let me open it up for any questions or comments that folks might have. Paula, so actually Lori was first. Lori, and then Paula.
I was curious at how many other groups may have attempted to become a public corporation and had difficulty.
That's a great question, Lori, that I unfortunately don't know the answer to, but I can definitely see if I can find any sort of information or research out there that could give us an idea of entities that have tried to become public corporations.
Paula.
I just wanted to say, Jennifer, thanks for doing that comparison of the exemptions, because I looked through the material and I thought there's a lot of those, and it's like, what do they all mean? So, so yes, this is a great start. Thank you.
Any other questions? Doug? Doug, if you're there, we cannot hear you. Doug, we still can't hear you. Well, maybe Katie, you could try and problem solve with Doug.
Yes, I will try.
That'd be great. Thank you. Jenny, I have a question for you, and I'll probably ask the other panelists as well, because I'd be interested in their thoughts. But, you know, we're looking for a structure that provides transparency and accountability for the universal health plan. And I'm wondering if you having done all this research, if you have any thoughts about, are there any other structures that you've come across which provide, I think, that balance between one, public accountability and transparency, you know, but two, the ability to operate in a expedient manner to be able to get things done. Any thoughts about that?
Thanks, Bruce. In looking at the public corporations, I spent a lot of time looking at state agents, the statutes that apply to state agencies and how state agencies are constructed, and some time looking into special districts and to see how they're set up. And looking at those compared to public corporations, they all have sort of that transparency that we would be looking for in a universal health plan and ensuring that the public had eyes on all of the workings. But something that those don't necessarily have, first of all, is a statewide, for the special districts, a statewide reach and the ability to work with other entities throughout the state as a special government body. And then not being a state agency obviously opens it up to a lot of those flexibilities that are highlighted with public corporations, given that it can exempt itself from a lot of those requirements that fall under executive branch agencies and other boards and commissions. And really, the public corporation is the only entity that I saw where it really is what you write it to be. So the statutory construction of a public corporation really seems to be able to be incredibly tailored to the specific mission of the entities that's being created. And so looking at the statutes for each of the different public corporations, there are entire lists of exemptions, but then throughout their statutes, there are smaller, just a good example was the workers' compensation. So not only is it not excluded from that entire chapter, it's not even excluded from that entire statute. There's just one provision within the statute that they wanted to be exempted from, that they find that to be useful to the public corporation structure. And so that's an option that public corporations have that I haven't seen with any other entity, that really detailed, minute, getting into like the most minute details of a statute to just determine whether or not the corporation should be subject to it or should it be exempted from it.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Any other questions?
I just want to check again with Doug really quickly. Doug, were you able to connect your audio? I tried a couple things on my end and it looks like it didn't work. Okay, I'll keep working on that.
Great, thanks, Katie. Oh, and Anne has a question.
Just generally speaking, when we talk about transparency and exempting rules, that's intended to have a purpose. In other words, to let the corporation move quickly or whatever. The dark side of the exact same topic is potential risk that happens. So if we choose to exempt ourselves from one thing, we also have to be aware of any risks. And my question is a process question. Will we be talking about operational principles as this gets implemented?
Talk a little bit about operational principles, if you would.
Okay, whenever you establish something, you also have to say, what do I need to do to sustain it into the future? So what will the job descriptions be? What for personnel, for example? You know, how do I protect my employees from harassment? What happens if somebody sues the board? Because most corporations, that's a vulnerability, right? So
Right.
all of those kinds of operational principles. My question is, are we also defining the operational principles?
And I would say we will in some cases and not with others. I don't think we have the time, nor quite frankly, the ability to get granular, for instance, about HR principles, which I would think would be the purview of, you know, a newly hired executive director and a management team. You know, as a board, we'd want to put out overarching guidelines that talk about, you know, for instance, that we would, you know, try and how we would hire people, how we would do things at a macro level, but I think we would leave it to an operating team to do some of the more granular pieces. And I think we'll sort of deal with that as we go forward. We can certainly add some operating principles, if you have some, for a public corporation as we delve into that policy in a little bit.
Yeah, there's actually some standards or professional best practices that we could use as guidance.
Great. We'll look forward to that. Thanks, Anne. Well, I think we have now been joined by our 4 panelists, and we've got a really great and interesting panel. We've got Ivo Tummer and Elaine Schooler from SAFE, who currently work at SAFE. And we've got Janet Billups, who helped create the OHSU Public Corporation. And we have Reed Wagner from the Willamette Falls Locks. I'm gonna, we're gonna ask each of you to sort of speak for, about 10 minutes about, we've just had, so a review by Jenny of public corporations and a little bit of information about each of your public corporations. I think what we'd love to hear about is, your thoughts about issues we should consider as we think about a public corporation for this universal health plan. What's working for you as a public corporation? What isn't working? If you had to do it all over again, what are some of the issues and problems you've run up against as a public corporation? So, with that, how about if we start with Ivo and Elaine, and I will leave it to each of you to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, maybe we'll start with an introduction. And thank you, Bruce. And it's great to see you. And everybody,
Likewise.
well, thanks for having us. Ivo Trummer, I'm the Government Relations Director for SAFE. This is my 3rd year that I'm here. So fairly recent to SAFE, and I'll turn it to Elaine maybe for an introduction.
Yep. Hi. Elaine Schooler. I'm Assistant General Counsel at SAFE. I've been here for 18 years in a couple different roles, a trial attorney, appellate attorney, and most recently Assistant General Counsel. So, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
I'll get us started, and my apologies. We are sitting in the same conference room as we have all day. This is day 3 of the legislative session, so you can imagine we are somewhat busy, and I will talk about that here, sort of about the challenges being a public corporation here too. It's fitting that we go first because we were the first public corporation, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline and a history of SAFE. We were founded in 1914. This is our 111th year now, for the purpose of providing workers' comp insurance in Oregon. We were created as a state agency by the state legislature back in the day. And while this is not for this conversation, I will always say, back then in 1914, we got $50,000 from the state legislature, and that was the last money we ever got from the state. We have been living off our premiums from policyholders ever since, and investment returns on our reserves and capital. In 1960, and there's a long story in between there too, but in 1960, the legislature created sort of the modern 3-legged stool of workers' compensation insurance in Oregon. So in Oregon, if you are an employer and you have employees, you're required to have workers' comp insurance. And you can either purchase it from the public insurer, that is SAFE. You can be self-insured. And I'll talk about that too, or you can buy it from one of the the current count, I think, is 358 private insurers that are active in Oregon. In the late 1970s, the legislature made us the first public corporation, and always asked, what does it mean? And I say, well, it's a completely made up term. It just means that we are outside the state budgeting process, but we are still a creature of statute completely. We are 100% public. Today, and I'll kind of fast forward today just to give you an idea of where we are in the marketplace. We cover about 56% of the total market in Oregon. If you take out self-employed insurers, we have 70% of what is called the voluntary market, and the 358 private insurers cover the rest. In our DNA and what we are founded for, we really insure companies that are hard to insure or injury, right, dangerous to work in. Think logging, construction, trucking, agriculture. That is where we come from. It's about 56,000 small businesses, and then 1,200 public entities. And I heard a little bit of the conversation earlier, so I want to maybe spend a moment here. 1,200 public entities. We cover the state. We cover every university, public university, OHSU. We insure every city, county, school district, special district in Oregon, but for a few of the very large public entities, think City of Portland, Portland Public Schools, City of Salem, etc. Clearly it's a small number, but clearly a lot of covered employees and with those entities. It is true the state is still, I think, statutorily bound to us, and we insure the state. And the other public corporations, as they were created, made it optional. We are still the insurer for them, if that makes sense. I will say I have a long list, Elaine and I have a long list of statute that we track whenever a bill comes out these days. When we were created, the legislature, intentionally or not intentionally, it's hard to go back to the 1970s and find the exact motivation, was not always as clean as with some of the later public corporations. So sometimes we are considered a public body for the purpose of certain legislation where it's clearly intended for state agencies, but we get captured. And then we have to go and ask for an exemption, et cetera. And in other ways, so it's not always clean when we're in and when we are out, but we're generally more out than in, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks.
I will maybe add off of that too. So as Ivo mentioned, we were the first public corporation, and so lessons learned by those who followed in our past. And getting to the what are we in, are we out? That was one of the lessons that was taken away by OHSU when they became a public corporation, was to specifically say in their creation language that they're not included unless they're specifically named. That really has benefited them in the long run, and something that, you know, could we go back and redo it, would have been hugely beneficial to know specifically when we're in and when we're not, rather than looking at, are we a public body? Are we a commission? Are we a special government group? There's lots of little wrinkles as to when we may be in or out, which can make it a little tricky. And just thinking about your creating language too, you know, those are the guardrails that you're building. So how broad or how narrow? Our guardrails in some ways are quite narrow. We can only provide workers' compensation insurance, no other lines based off of our statute. And we can only offer that insurance in the state of Oregon. So that is very restrictive in what we can do, and limits some other opportunities that other insurers would have in the general marketplace. So something to keep in mind is you are really building the parameters in which you can operate in, and those words, depending on how they're utilized, can take on special meaning and place limits on yourself, or be more broad and expansive and give you more freedom to act as a independent body, as opposed to a very defined entity.
Well, thanks, Elaine and Eva. We're gonna hold questions from
That's what you're.
the group for everybody, but you've highlighted a couple really good things. You know, one is this whole definition of in and out, and that's very helpful. And the other, which I hadn't thought of, is the issue about out of state. You know, we're grappling with issues of do we or do we not insure people who live in Oregon but work out of state and are insured by an out-of-state entity. So some questions that we've got to grapple with. So thanks. You also mentioned OHSU, so it's a great segue to Janet, who really helped put together the the creation of OHSU as a public corporation. So Janet, what should we know, and what lessons learned from your experience in putting that together?
Well, it's very nice to meet all of you. Janet Phillips. I was general counsel. I was at OHSU as their lawyer for 30 years, 15 of those years, general counsel, retired as general counsel, handed over the reins in 2017. We tend to keep people on for transition for a while, so I fully retired in 2019. So I'll just tell you what my role was in the public corporation, and it started around 1992. There were community leaders brought together to evaluate potential structures for a new OHSU. The motivation, as it often is, was money. OHSU very much needed access to the capital markets. And this may not be of any relevance to you guys, but I'll just try and give you the snapshot. For example, we had the busiest labor and delivery unit in the state, well, probably in the state, certainly in the region, and one toilet. It needed to be rebuilt or built from the ground up. Couldn't get approval to go to the capital markets, not for any bad reasons, but being part of the system of higher education, and it put us into the same need bucket as the 7 other universities. And it was that sort of thing that finally, looking at financial distress and the very, very limited amount of money that was coming from the state, led community leaders together with Dr. Peter Kohler, who was president of OHSU at the time, to launch this examination of what could the new structure of OHSU look like. So I'd been there for a few years, and it fell to me to do the legal architecture. I was required to do it alone because the Attorney General's office opposed the measure. I did get help from bond counsel. Couldn't have done it without bond counsel. There's a huge section on securities. And we looked at the SAFE model. We looked at many others. Our approach, as Elaine mentioned, how it's clean, our approach, it was not so much retrospective on what other problems did the other structures have, but it was more of what really works, what makes it as clean as possible. And so our approach was to say, OHSU is a unit of government, but is not a state agency, and therefore all the laws that apply only to state agencies no longer apply to OHSU. And I think I listed them by way of example, or maybe it was exhaustive. It's been 30 years, so I've forgotten that. But if there are laws that apply to all public bodies, such as the public records law, those laws still apply to OHSU. And some of you may have heard or seen references to OHSU as quasi-private or quasi-public or public-private. And it's not, it's public. It is a public body. I think that there is wisdom for a informational standpoint in describing that quasi-private viewpoint, but as a matter of law, which all of you are here to hear about, it is a fully public body, and it is a unit of state government, which became important when we did finally access the capital markets. I think that there are some things that really motivated certain choices over others that might not apply to you. One was 100% of the faculty supported this, as did our unions. Union presidents came in and testified in support of that. We made it clear that no changes were being made in the near term to any kind of employment policies, as I recall. But what was uppermost in the minds of the then employees was participation in PERS. Had we become completely private, everyone would have been taken out of PERS. And that was not acceptable to anyone. So that was only one of many motivations to remain public. The other is, quite frankly, the mission of OHSU is to serve all the people of Oregon. It is not simply a hospital, which is not denigrating other hospitals. It has many, many missions of science and discovery, education, as well as providing healthcare. And that mission has been uppermost. I didn't know the last Dr. Jacobs, who was president, but certainly Dr. Kohler, and then Dr. Robertson, and now Steve Statham, who's interim president, all recognize and embrace that mission is an Oregonian mission. And so we needed to and wanted to remain public. There could have been some reasons to go private, but they got ferried out throughout that process, the evaluation process. Let's see. You had asked, are there problems with the public corporation that we didn't anticipate that have become problems in the future? And I started kind of going through all the difficulties an academic medical center faces in these times, as well as 10 or 20 years ago. But all the difficulties and problems I can think of are not due to the public corporation and its structure. It's due to things that happen in our world. And it's not a perfect structure, but I honestly can't think of something off the top of my head that's really a problem that we would have gone back and said, oh, we're going to do this over. I mean, I suspect there were a couple early on, but they were I think minor fixes. And I will tell you that part of my process in my part of it was, at the time, Oregon laws were in hardbound gray books, and I had a copy at home, and basically that was my life. I literally looked at every page of the Oregon statutes. Some of them was to say, okay, this doesn't apply, doesn't apply, doesn't apply. So that was part of our method of saying we are public, but not subject to state agency laws, but subject to everything else. There is a book that was written on OHSU's move to a public corporation. In case anyone's interested, Powell still has it. It's called Transformed. I've forgotten the name of the writer, William Graves, maybe. And if anybody's interested, that is, it tells the story of what we did. And there could be some nugget of information here and there that will help you as you chart your own path forward. So I'll turn it back to you,
Janet. That was great. You gave me certainly something to think about, a nugget, which was, access to capital. As if this is indeed a universal health plan, we're going to, and got to think through this. I'm a doctor, not a finance person, but one of the issues that we're going to certainly need is financial reserves. And I think we're going to need to look very carefully at some of the financial issues that may come before us as a public corporation. So thank you. With that, we're going to turn things over to Reed for the final thought about public corporations, and then we'll open it up for questions from the group. So Reed, tell us about Willamette Falls Locks.
Happy to do so. Thanks for having me. I'm Reed Wagner. I'm the executive director of the Willamette Falls Locks Authority. And maybe important to point out that I'm a part-time contracted executive director. We have no employees right now because we're in our infancy. The locks were river infrastructure built about 150 years ago. And it was in a partnership between the predecessors of PGE and the U.S. Army, what was the Army Corps of Engineers, or the predecessor of the Army Corps of Engineers. And PGE ran the locks until about 1910, when the Corps of Engineers took them over and operated them until about 2011, and they shut them down. The community wanted to be able to continue to keep the riverway open. The locks are located between West Lynn and Oregon City, and so established a task force and then a state approved commission. And then the commission in 2021 brought a recommendation to the legislature in House Bill 2564, which established the Willamette Falls Locks Authority as a public corporation. I started as well, I should say, following 2021, the governor then appointed the 11 board seats. And then I was hired in mid-2023 to kind of start to construct what is now our public corporation. So when I arrived, there was no budget, there were no financial policies, there was no legal representation. So it really was the initial building blocks of this authority. I can tell you that in the short time that we've been here to evaluate, there are already things that we need to clean up. Ivo, you said it wasn't quite as clean maybe in the 70s. It's still not clean. There's still things that you're not going to get right out of the gate. And so we are in this session having some adjustments made to our statute, and most specifically, one is following budget law. We don't have constituents. We're of statewide importance. So putting a budget committee is a difficult thing to do, but to follow budget law, you need to be able to establish a budget committee. So some of the procurement agreements that were lobbied by interests in the last few hours before the bill passed included the amount we work with DAS to deal with procurement, and we need to adjust that so we can stay efficient. It doesn't mean we won't use state procurement in certain situations. The other thing is just the board membership. The appointment of board members is not always swift. It needs to go through the governor's office. We don't need to be confirmed by the Senate, but even still, it's not extremely efficient. So having quorum, we're redefining it as quorum is the amount of board positions that are actually seated at the time versus the total amount of board positions. So those are a couple of the things that we've recognized almost immediately that we are planning to adjust in this legislative session.
Great. Thanks, Reed. Janet, you.
Reed said something that reminded me. One other thing that we did was make it clear that we are not a unit of local government, because the model, the budget law, I've forgotten the title, but the budget law that applies to local government is it's just not workable for an academic medical center. So that's one of many reasons that we made it clear we're not part of local government. It's not that budget process. I used to know about it back when I was a lawyer from Multnomah County, and it's onerous.
Thanks. Let me open things up to committee members and any questions you have for our panelists. Paul.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation and all that information. That was excellent. I was just curious if part of preparing for coming here or finding out about this, if you've had a chance to look at the guiding principles and the initial 12-step plan that the Universal Health Plan Governance Board started from to begin with, and if you've had a chance to look at things that might snag with experiences you've had as a public corporation. Does that make sense?
I did not. Yeah, I did not. I did not.
Yeah, I would love for to find out if there's some chance for you to look at the specifics of the Universal Health Plan, like overarching mission and everything, because it's great to hear that the mission stays the same and you're able to pursue that once you transition to public corp, but especially everything that we have as our guiding principles, it'd be nice to know that there's not easily anticipated snags for our existing direction we're going. Thank you again for presenting.
And we can send you all there. It's very short. It's just 12 dot points. And we can send that to you. And if you had any comments, that would be great. I guess my question would be, knowing what you know now, is there any other kind of a structure that you think would have been a better structure to meet the goals that each of your organizations have, understanding that they're each different and each had different goals? But do you have any thoughts about, gee, we should have become something else? Ivo, anything?
No, I'll say, right, it's our mission. We are a not-for-profit public corporation. It's our mission, right, to make workers' comp available, accessible, and provide great benefits. So I think we're very happy with where we are as a structure. We would like to be closer to OHSU in terms of how we are structured, but that's that's in the details. But the general, no, we are very happy. I mean, the only other step after that is going mutual or becoming fully private, right? But that would change, I think, the DNA of who we are in many ways.
Elaine, Reed, Janet, any thoughts?
I would say the exact same thing. And OHSU is an academic medical center for all of Oregon, and all of us are very tied to that public mission. So this is as flexible as a public body can be in this state, given, with the limitations of statutes that apply to all public bodies. The next step would be private, and that is just, that violates who we are.
Thanks.
Yeah, and as in 2019, I had the pleasure of working with Evo in prior roles when we were looking at standing up a flood control agency and evaluated many different types of governance structures that fit current state of Oregon models or that could fit state of Oregon models. And arriving then in 2023 with this organization as a public corporation, I wouldn't consider any of those other models that we had looked at in prior years. It fits what it is that we need to do, and we are a very great public interest and of the community. So I don't think going private is something we would ever consider.
Hey, Reed, I had a question for you about Senate confirmation. I noticed that your director and members are appointed by the governor, but there is no Senate confirmation, which is a little different from both SAFE and OHSU. And I was wondering, is there any background or reason for that you know of?
I wasn't there for the conversations, but I could find that out and send that information off to you. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I was just curious as to why that was, since it stood in the face of so many of our public boards and commissions, et cetera.
Yeah, and the only thing that I can think of is of the many directors of the state that are some that need to be confirmed and some that don't, and that maybe the same test was placed on the public corporation. But I'll talk to the person that was leading our government affairs efforts at the time and get an answer for you.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep.
Committee members, any other questions for these esteemed panelists who are great? Anne, and then Lori. Anne, you're on mute. Anne, you're on mute.
Okay, this is addressed to Janet, and it's just a point of curiosity more than anything else. In some of the materials we got, you mentioned that part of the efficiencies of OHSU was the ability to do mergers. So my question to you is, did you have to do any kind of restructuring or get any kind of approval?
Approval for what? I mean,
I'm not sure. The material said that there were mergers involved in OHSU as one of the efficiencies. In other words, possibly buy a vendor or something like that. I'm not quite sure what. It just happened to be in the write-up.
okay. Well, OHSU acquired Portland Adventist Hospital. That might be an example. These things are always described as mergers. I will just say that is to address cultural niceties.
Right.
It was acquired. From what I've read, I'm not on the inside, so this is, but from what I've read about the legacy merger is that it's an acquisition. If it were either for the acquisitions we've done before, and we had almost a kind of sort of merger with Salem Hospital a few years ago that didn't work out in the long run. The only approvals that were needed were the same approvals that any hospital, for example, has to go through to go to OHA or whoever the regulatory authority is. There was nothing state agency oriented or related that would that required a different kind of approval system and process. And the statute, as I recall, does refer to our ability to have mergers and acquisitions and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Lori.
So you had mentioned that the unions also were in support of this. And I was curious how that piece was handled.
How the piece was handled? Well, it was the result of internal conversations, series, many, not just one, between executive leadership and union leadership to say, you know, not that I was in the room very much of the time, but what do you need from us? You know, how would this work? This is what we're proposing. We think it'll work for employees. What do you think? And I think there was give and take and changes made to the proposal based on questions. I think the structure was seen as an honest and forthright structure that would protect employees as well as protect our public mission. But there, you know, the details always matter. And so there would have been, I'm not going to remember the specifics, but I do know that the union leadership would say, well, what about this? And what about that? And then we would go back and say, okay, good question. We'll make some adjustments. That's how union leadership and other organizations and individuals got on board and supported it.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank Elaine and Ivo and Reed and Janet. This was really informative. We're tremendously grateful for the time you took to spend with us, both in preparation and talking to us just now. Really appreciate it. And your insights will really help us as we move forward. As a parting gift, should the Universal Health Plan become up and running, we will guarantee you health care along with that of 4.4 Oregonians. So thank you very, very much. We really, really appreciate it. And with that, I think what we're going to do is why don't we just take a 10-minute break? And it's 2:06 by my watch. Why don't we come back at, actually, we're running a little ahead of schedule, but why don't we come back at about 2:16, 2:17, and we'll see you then.
I just wanted to,
let
oh,
me
if
just
I could
yeah,
say
let me
one
just
thing.
add before I leave, thanks for inviting me and good luck to you in this endeavor.
Thanks, Janet. We
Thanks, Janet.
appreciate it.
I just wanted to note for committee members, we're going to be talking about the draft proposal when we come back from break. So if everybody wanted to pull that up and take a look at it and just have it ready for when we come back, that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Hello?
Doug, was that you? Did you figure it out, Doug? Doug, I think that was you, and I did hear you for a moment, so you're on to it.
Hello.
Okay, I'm trying it right now. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Now there you go.
Can Bruce hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Hold on.
Doug, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. But
All right, thanks.
Were you able to hear the first part of the meeting?
He was. Yep, he was just having some issues with his audio, but he's getting it figured out now.
Great. Doug, glad you joined us. Thanks. We'll just wait another moment or two before we begin. Okay. Why don't we get back to work? Thank you all for joining us. This is the part of the meeting that we will discuss the proposal that Jenny had sent out. We're not going to read through it or go line by line. You know, you've all had it. There's some background about public corporations that Jenny has put together, some information about statutory construction. And then there's, I think most importantly for us today is the conclusion and recommendations, and whether or not, based on what you've heard today and read, there's anything that you think should either be deleted or added to that. I would start by just mentioning two things that I think we should add to the proposal, the recommendations. And I'm probably not going to be very good at wordsmithing it, but the two big issues I heard from them today. was, number one, I think in establishing public corporation, the board needs to make clear what statutes it's exempt from and what statutes it's not. That was a clear message that certainly the SAFE folks are grappling with that OHSU isn't. And I think looking at that language in OHSU about only those things that pertain only those things that pertain to OHSU need to be listed. Some language like that would be really important. And my other takeaway was I just think we need to pay attention to being certain that we're able to function with the ability to assure financial sustainability and the appropriate reserves. That I don't know that it's exactly access to capital markets. Usually people don't use capital markets for reserves, but we might. And I think that's something that we need to be certain to pay some attention to. With that, I would turn it over to committee members for your thoughts about the draft proposal, anything in it that you think we need to strike, anything that we need to clarify, etc. Any thoughts? And I'll give folks just a moment to look through it again. Judy, and then Ann.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate the draft and all the work that's gone into it. Thank you. I think there's wisdom when Ms. Billups talked about when we asked her what works. She said designing the structure of the OHSU public corporation so that all laws that only apply to state agencies didn't apply to OHSU Corporation, but those laws that apply to all public bodies does. And I thought that's very helpful.
That's great. I think you said more eloquently what I was trying to say in the beginning, so that's perfect. And I know you had your hand up. Now I see it's gone. Now it's back. And you're on mute.
I thought this was really well written. I didn't have any specific changes. I had a couple of questions which have been answered. In terms of what standards will apply and things like that. And also the capital markets. I think that's really important. One point here that I have a question about is it says that it would not be bounded by a territory. Which I think allows us to insure people in Washington, Idaho, and potentially California, if people cross the border. But based on what Janet said, is there a possibility, or is this too pie in the sky to have a regional consortium? So for example, if Washington decides to do a public entity, is there a potential for joining with them in a consortium?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that could be possible at some point. And that would make sense. So to be certain that we have language that reflects the flexibility to do that.
Yeah.
And I just thought around capital markets, actually, I know it was discussed by the task force, the board might invest in facilities that are needed in certain parts of the state or partner with others to do that. So access to funding would be important.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Other thoughts? Sarah.
Yes, can somebody remind me what our timeline is in trying to pass this when it turns into not being a draft anymore, but our recommendation on to the board, please?
So I think what we're gonna do is make changes to that based on the feedback that we're providing now. And then it'll, and Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, that'll just come back to us at the next meeting for a final approval.
Yes.
And then go to the board.
So what I can do is incorporate all of the changes that everyone's putting together, send that draft back out to everyone so that they can have the ability to look at it. And then we can take that back to the board. Either you have an option whether or not you want to take it back to an operations meeting and review the revised proposal, or if you wanted to have the board just take a look at the proposal after the edits that are made and the members sort of send me any edits or any thoughts. So you can wait to the next meeting and review the draft, or you can review the draft individually and send me comments. I think probably for something as large as this proposal, you might want to have another opportunity to discuss it, Bruce, but it would be up to you, up to the
I was
committee.
actually gonna go the opposite way to say, this one, I think is not gonna be terribly controversial and warrant lots more discussion, and that you might be able to make the changes and we can all weigh in on email and then get it off. But we can discuss that when
Yes.
we wrap up.
Yes, because I'll want to remind everyone of public meeting law.
Right. Does that get at your question, Sarah? Paula?
I'm just going to comment that what Judy said that she heard in regards to, you know, how public versus the state agencies, and it really was great to hear them talk, because it didn't seem like there was a downside. Actually, it was really being a public corporation was the best of that world for them. So yeah, that was really great. And I think to keep that in mind, and how OHSU was able to create a broader framework for them to work within. So
Thanks, Paula. Yeah, that was very reassuring. Paul? Paul, we can't hear you if you're on mute.
Oh no, I think I was double muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Excellent. All right, thank you. I just want to say I'm the type to read all the terms and conditions and absolutely everything on a contract before I sign. So looking at the draft proposal, it looks great in terms of the language I'm reading. There's a lot of, when it asks on this slide, for instance, do you agree with the proposed chapters and statutes for explicit adherence or exemptions? I'll need a lot more time to process what those lists are before I could explicitly say I agree with either list. But in general, the language, I really like it. And what I see, I support. I could use some more time for processing specifics if we do have that time. Thank you.
Great. We'll be certain you've got the time to do that. Sarah?
Yes, let me pull up the draft. I'm focusing on the part where it talks about OHSU and how the board of directors of the public corporation is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And it wasn't until after our guests left that I kind of formed this question in my head as to whether the board members have tended to just serve for 4 years or 8 years with no possibility of, you know, a different length of term, like a 6-year term or a 10-year term or that kind of thing.
Jenny, you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So I would have to look back at the statutes, but I believe it is clarified in their statutes exactly how long board members serve and their ability to re-up and continue service after term ends, be reappointed. I think that that is part of the statutory language for OHSU, and I think for most of the public corporations, but I can send out more information on that if you would like to see how each of them are structured in terms of how long board members serve. And I could also provide what the UHPGB's board, because they're structured with explicit terms and explicit numbers and explicit amounts of time for service and the ability to re-up again as well, if that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to hold up this like round one right now at all. But I think it might be good to revisit this later, further down the road. I don't know if that's a year from now or 8 months or what, to best strategize how we can leverage experience and wisdom and longevity and not necessarily ride the 4-year roller coaster in theory.
Well, I would point out that when people re-up, it's not automatic. It's at the pleasure of the governor to reappoint somebody. It's not automatic for an appointee to just say, I want to continue, and they continue. But we should clarify that. Other thoughts? We thought we would start with an easier one. That's why we chose public corporations to start with. And I think we've got a good start. This is hopefully how we will carry out, all of our work, which is we'll try and have some background and something for the committee to react to. Not as anything final, but just my experience is it's a lot better to have something for people to react to than to say, okay, what do you think about public corporations? And having something to react to makes sense. And then we'll discuss it, we'll make some changes, and we'll bring it back to the group. And like we will today, and what I'm hearing today, that certainly there are some committee members who want some more time. So, what I would propose is that we will make the changes to the recommendations that we've heard. We'll send that out. You're still able to give us additional feedback, so feel free to do that. When you do that, just please copy all of the board members. Is that not right, Jenny? No?
No.
Okay.
Don't do that. Don't copy all.
Don't
When
do
you're
what I
sending-
said.
When you're sending feedback, you can send your feedback directly to me as staff. Don't copy other committee members and don't copy the board members, because that is an inadvertent public meeting if everyone is copied. So send it only to me. I will make the changes and I will send back out to board member, or I'm sorry, I can't do that. I will make the changes, and the next time we meet, we can discuss those changes as a group.
Yeah, we'll send out a version right before the meeting.
It'll be
of all the
posted for public
changes.
comment, yes.
Yeah. So that's still one, it'll, will reflect the changes today, but also if you have additional changes and additional language. And then we'll have another opportunity to fine tune that at the beginning of the next meeting. And that should give everybody enough time. You've got several weeks to look through things and think about it. Sarah.
Yes. Okay. So kind of addressing Paul's statements. I think there's taking more time when language is more specific and more detailed. And then there is a choice that I don't think we've discussed yet today about, is there a way to speed things up by being more vague or being more general? And so I agree with Paul that some of this language around, especially the exemptions, is quite technical, quite legalese. And so maybe we could consider, if it's not too wimpy of us, to kind of punt some of that. And if we could be less specific or generalize that section a little bit, so that it would be easier for us to sign off with our various levels of non-legal background or legal background or whatever mix we have.
How about we do both? Which is perhaps we could put together, in essence, an executive summary and then have some of that more technical language in there. Would that work, Sarah?
Yeah, I'd have to glance through that exemption section again to see if I felt comfortable with that. So I don't think I can answer right here, right now.
Okay.
Until I
Fair enough.
see the executive summary. The committee further recommends that the board provide explicit exemption, and then we name all these specific chapters and statutes. It's very specific, but yeah, I've raised some ideas and I'm good with carrying
Okay.
on.
All right. Paul.
I was just gonna say I supported highly your suggestion of a summary as well as the opportunity to continue reading the updated versions. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, nothing, I think there'll be plenty of time between now and the next meeting for those who want to look at each of those particular statutes and look through them. And I think it would be great if folks would take some time to do that. It will be quite an undertaking. Some of them are particularly long and detailed. Jenny.
I just wanted to note a couple things. So yeah, there's so many statutes within looking at the public corporations that are currently established and the statutes that they adhere to and are exempted from. The statutes that are included in the proposal are those that are listed as the common statutes that we talked about earlier in the presentation. And I will say, and I think Sarah, to your point too, even within looking at those more common statutes, the way that they interplay with other statutes and what Janet had mentioned, both about the idea of the statutes that all public bodies must adhere to, those can really be condensed. The ones that are pointed out in the proposal as explicit acceptance really do kind of fall underneath that category, but without more statutory exploration on my part or some sort of research that the board would do, it's hard to note what all of those statutes would be. And I really appreciated Janet said, she went through every single page of the statutes because there are connections and statutory references that reference each other. And so it is a little bit difficult in terms of understanding how one statute might affect and sort of that interplay she mentioned earlier also about you don't know if something that you're exempting yourself from might exempt yourself or exempt you from something else you don't want to be exempted from. But I will say in terms of the proposal's construction, those are just the general common statutes amongst all of the different corporations. And that might be a smaller body to start to look at if you have the time to just familiarize yourself with those listed statutes as the more common ones that aren't really more contingent about on what the ultimate universal health plan looks like, if that's helpful.
And I would just add that we're not adopting each of those exemptions. And I think what we can do is frame our recommendations to perhaps be preceded by a statement that says, the following things need to be considered as exemption. However, but we recommend that with the establishment of the board, the executive director and legal counsel carefully review each statute to be certain there is no language that would impede the function of the public corporation. How's that, Sarah? I think that's what you were looking for. And we're not saying signed, sealed, and delivered, all these are exempt, but they need to be reviewed carefully.
That is perfect about the in consultation with legal counsel, or just explicitly saying that there's going to be a more detailed look by legal counsel at the right moment or something. Yeah, that totally addresses, and it makes it so much easier for me to sign off on this
Super.
draft. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Other thoughts? Jenny, we did not have anyone signed up for public comment. Okay. Any other thoughts? And we'd actually appreciate any thoughts about how this process went, any ways we could make it better. Any thoughts?
I personally appreciated the folks on the panel. I thought that was very helpful.
Yeah, it's always good to have people that actually know what they're talking about, isn't it? Any other thoughts? I would, if you haven't heard, I would just leave with one announcement. Morgan Cowling, who was our executive director, has stepped down, and Jenny is going to be the interim executive director for a bit, and we have a job announcement posted that Katie, can we send to everybody on the committee? Because we'd love for people to
Yes,
disseminate
I
that.
did. I sent it yesterday.
Fantastic. So you've all this great. I'm always a step or two behind, so appreciate that. Any other final thoughts? Judy, any comments from you? Jenny or Katie?
Ask that we could clarify when you would like committee members to have feedback back to you for the draft proposal.
I'm going to look to Jenny. What do you think?
So let me just count back a little bit. Our next meeting is February 27th, which gives us a posting date of the 20th or about. So in order to incorporate everything and ensure that we meet our posting deadline, I would say if everyone could have materials back by Monday, the 17th, I should be able to make any changes that people are sending in and make our posting date on Thursday, February 20th. So Monday, the 17th.
Right.
And the only thing the other thing I was going to add is that it is on the future agenda that in the next meeting, we will start to look at federal waivers just to give the committee an idea of what we'll be looking at when we meet again. But we'll start with a review of the proposal and the changes.
Great, thanks, Jenny. And next topic is waivers. Sarah.
Yeah. So before February 17th, will we get a chance to see the few points that were discussed today turned into beautiful additional sentences?
Yeah.
Okay.
I should have mentioned that. I will try to get an updated draft out to all of you. Let's see. By next Friday. So that'll give the committee members 2 weeks to take a look at the draft.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other final questions, comments? Judy.
I just want to clarify the process. So committee will look at the draft, send you feedback, Jenny, then a draft will be brought together at our next meeting, the committee will endorse the proposal, and then the proposal goes to the board. Is that, and the board can decide yay or nay, or go back to the drawing board. Okay.
Right, we're putting together recommendations to the board. The board's the final decision maker. Okay. Sarah,
Yeah, I think I'm not muted. And does the board want that straw poll kind of idea? Do we need to take the temperature to be able to notify the board that we're leaning yes on the general idea of public corporation before, you know, the whole cycle goes through its further steps?
I would say, and Judy, you correct me if I'm wrong, that I think, you know, Judy and I are board members. And I think for, you know, for some things, the board may look for more direction and for other things less. And I think that we started with this topic. This wasn't going to be a topic that the board had huge, strong feelings about. There may be some others in the future where we may get some more direction.
And this is very much in alignment with the task force recommendations. It's not like it's something way out in left field that's totally new that we're inventing. You know, it feels like, you know, the board's endorsed the task force recommendation. So.
And then really quickly, just to follow up on Paul's question to the panelists, I will email all 4 of those panelists with the structure that the board has agreed upon, those 12 components, and our values and principles. And then we'll make sure that staff will make sure that committee members get the panelists' thoughts on that.
Katie, would you talk with me before you do that, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Well, thank everybody. Next meeting again, Jenny, is February 27th.
February 27th.
See everybody February 27th. Be careful out there, wash your hands, stay healthy, and we'll see you in a month.